Hi, y'all. So my apologies. We're on to video 2. I warned you. This one might be a long one. So we talked about accuracy, and then credibility is the one that's missing from here. Accuracy is about the reliability, the truthfulness, and the correctness of the content. So asking yourself if the information seems accurate. So if you have something like a fact, you could Google it. Like if your evidence that you put right here, your type of evidence was fact, then a really great thing, right there, is fact. A really great thing that you can do is Google the fact to see if you can find other instances where it's borne out to determine whether or not it's actually accurate. And so for credibility, I will link also in the note here, I will link an explanation of what exactly credibility means, or I will maybe maybe I'll turn this into a link for y'all so that you can click on it and get a definition that makes sense. But basically, credibility is about whether or not you personally find the information to be believable. So it's a little bit related to kind of the ethos of the speaker. So I'll include a link for that term specifically. I forgot that it was currency on this list, not credibility. Accuracy and credibility are kind of closely related. So that's basically what you would do. So for me, I would look and I would say, okay, is this relevant to what I believe is the author's main point of the article? And I would say, yes, it is relevant. So I'm going to evaluate it and I'm going to say, this anecdote is relevant in explaining why the author felt compelled to go gradeless, which is the topic of her article. So yes, it's relevant. It's an explanation. Accuracy. This is okay. Credibility. I know this because I've Googled this person before. If you Google this woman, you will find out that she's actually been an educator for quite a long time. So I'm going to go ahead and say that her credibility for being able to talk about her own experience in the classroom is pretty high. She's not somebody who's like, oh, well, here's how to do everything after having only taught like a semester, or for not really being like an educator, but being like, I don't know, like an administrator who has like one course. This is somebody who is consistently teaching classes. I believe her. I think she's credible. You're going to do the exact same thing 2 more times. Again, I recommend looking for types of evidence first and then including them here and then evaluating them. The next section I want to talk about is fallacies. So there is a resource that you can click on. It's been a minute. It's probably going to make me sign in again. No, okay. So a fallacy is simply an error in logic. They're incredibly common. we rely on them because they're also effective. A good critical thinker learns to spot them so they're not tricked. A good critical author often uses them to trick people. A fallacy is just an error in logic. There are different kinds that happen commonly, so they've been given names so that you can kind of point them out. Here are some of the most common ones that you're going to find: hasty generalization, red herring, slippery slope, cherry picking. There are others down here if you're having trouble finding any. A lot of these work. So when you're looking for logical fallacies, what you're going to do is you're going to read the descriptions and the examples, and then you're going to try and find one in the article itself. So I had a little pause and I looked for my example that I was going to pull up so that y'all didn't have to watch me search for it. And also because this is a process that takes a little while. It's going to take you a while to find examples of these. What I found was an example of what I would consider slippery slope. I would also say there are probably some hasty generalizations about students in these articles, as well as possibly the false dilemma or either or fallacy. Those are ones that happen quite a lot, and I would recommend looking for examples of those in this article. So I'm going to choose slippery slope, and the sentence that I'm going to choose is this one. And if, again, you're watching this video, congratulations, you have your first logical fallacy. This is an example of a slippery slope. So this is happening pretty far down in the paragraphs. So this is, I'm going to count this as paragraph 11. When you do the counting for the citation, just do it as best you can. I know it's kind of weird. Like, do I count this? Do I not count this? Do it however you want, and I'll figure it out because it will give me the general neighborhood. So type out the weakness or fallacy in the form of a direct quote. So I'm going to copy and paste it because that's how I am. And then I'm going to say it's by Blum. It's written in 2017 and it's appearing in, we're going to go with paragraph 11. And I'm going to make sure that I put quotes around. I'm also going to say, I'm going to do brackets because they is a really vague pronoun. What they're talking about is referring to a previous sentence about grades. So I'm going to say, but grades are also threats. If you don't comply in every way, no matter how you feel about anything, you will be dethroned. That's a pretty slippery slope fallacy right there. It's also really dramatic. If applicable, identify the type of fallacy. It says if applicable, you may, I would prefer that you try and look at the different fallacies and find examples of them. If you're gonna not identify the type of fallacy, you need to at least explain why why you think it's an error in reasoning. If you can't name it as one of the specific ones, but you're like, something feels off about this, that's totally fine. But here I would like you to fill out, if you can't identify it by name, as either, like the straw man fallacy or the red herring or the fallacy of false cause, which is also called non sequitur. If you can't specifically name it, I would like you to at least explain why you think it's a logical fallacy, because I don't want you just pasting quotes in without any kind of context explaining. Sometimes when you explain, it gives me a better idea of your comprehension of both fallacies and the text itself. So in my case, what I'm including is one of my faves, slippery slope. And there it is in all of its glory. Okay. And so then you'll want to find another weakness or fallacy in the logic. Now, we're going to move on to this counter evidence section. This is for the Unit 4 source that you found on your own in the library databases. So I asked you last week to find a counter argument source, and here's where it comes into play. You're going to want this information. This is helpful for summary, and it's helpful for me to look at it if I need to reference it. And then you're going to answer questions about the counter argument, the counter evidence, and how it relates to your original article. So this question says, what counter argument, which is the view that opposes the instructor provided Unit 4 reading. So the article that you have should oppose what Blum is saying. is presented in your second article. Write 1 to 2 sentences that explain the counter evidence from the source you found. And this should actually say from that explain the counter argument. I will fix that in the other. Yeah. So what I want you to write here is just an explanation of the counter argument. I didn't find one because this is just sort of a seat of my pants example, but I would say it would look something like this. In the we'll say hiring, because I don't know if hireability is actually a word. Again, I'm making all of this up, but you can see that what I'm doing is I'm summarizing an article that opposes Blum. If Blum is talking about moving away from grading, this person is talking about why grades are important in terms of students who are trying to get jobs. Here, it says to find 1 or 2 pieces of counter evidence, like facts, statistics, expert testimony, etc., that support the claim of the author of this article, I'll even say of your article, and type them out in the form of a direct quote below, just like you did before, but you don't have to evaluate them as much. So again, I'm going to make this up. This is totally fake, but this is an example of the kind of thing you want to do. And there you go. And then, we'll do it like this. So this is a piece of counter evidence that's kind of proving this claim up here. And the reason you're doing this is so that you can use it in your article if needed. Down here, the last question is, how does the argument impact the original author? In this case, we're talking about Blum. How does the counter argument impact the original author's argument? Does it refute the argument altogether or provide another perspective? Does it make the original argument more or less effective? And again, if you're tuning into this video and you've been patient and been watching for about half an hour, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of a lowdown on this article. One of the things that you might want to think about and critique is, does Blum do a good enough job in talking about people who are not directly her students at a relatively prestigious 4-year university? Blum has a little bit of wiggle room in terms of students who don't necessarily need to find jobs at a certain pay grade immediately upon graduation because she's coming from an institution of relative privilege. So one thing that you can think about is, if you find an article that sort of explains like, yeah, but people really need grades to get jobs, then one thing that the article you found might do is sort of open up the fact that Blum isn't really thinking about some of the real world consequences for students who can't present the fact that who have difficulty applying for jobs if they don't have grades. So that would be an example of a counter argument wherein this counter argument does undermine her position a little bit. So that's just something to think about. You could use that as like a, does, Susan Bloom really think about people at technical and community colleges? Or is she speaking more from people who are like, is grade going gradeless only for people in certain situations? Those are things to keep in mind. Okay, we're coming up on the end. This is the example for you. Thanks for sticking in, for tuning in, and just do the best you can with this worksheet.